The epic studio tour videos. You've seen them all over YouTube. There's a bunch of them. I myself am guilty of making one or two of them. But what is an epic studio? How do you classify it? What goes into it? And how can you make one for yourself? But let me just spoil the answer here for you. It's easy. Gear, gear, and gear. 1176s, recording consoles, epic studio treatment, epic lighting, and of course, very expensive camera and video equipment. I'm just kidding. Sort of. All right, now as an audio engineer and musician and content creator myself, I have watched a ton of these studio tour videos. I absolutely love it. It's a guilty pleasure. And I've also made over 120 epic studio tours here on this channel alone. By the way, if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the little notification bell so you can be notified every Monday when a new studio tour comes out. And while we're pressing buttons, go ahead and hit that thumbs up like button as well. So some of the studios we've seen here on this channel are massive commercial studios, historic recording facilities. Some of them are in really crazy home studio situations for artists and working musicians and producers. Some of them even so small that they're literally in a closet. That's right, we've done several home studio tours that are literally so small they are actually in a closet. Now, as a fan of making stuff regardless of the setting, I want to share what makes a studio tour epic to me. All right, now before we get into it, did you actually hit the like button? Because if not, it's super easy. Just give it a little press. It's totally free to do. And as a reward, here's a picture of my dog. All right, let's get into it. First things first, what makes this studio or a video unique? All right, now when looking for the unique angle of the studio or the video, it all boils down to one thing: story. Story is everything. In music and movies and books, a story wins. So what's going to be the unique story of a studio tour? Well, let me tell you. Number one, the person who has the studio, the story about that person and what led them to this studio. Number two, the work that is actually happening in the studio and how the studio is being used. Number three, the location of or design or workflow of the studio and maybe its historical significance. The story is what makes each studio and therefore each video unique. One of my personal favorites is when you find a studio tour of someone you've literally never ever heard of, and you click on it and you find out that that person's work has made its way into your life without you even knowing it. Other times it can be a guest or a studio of someone or somewhere you absolutely have heard of, but you have never actually seen it for yourself. It's these stories from the guests, the studios, the videos that inspire us, taking us down all sorts of different paths. Okay, now that we've gotten the most important part, story, out of the way, we can move on to some of the nuts and bolts that I think are important for qualifying an epic studio tour, and that is breaking what we call the fourth wall. And what do I mean by that? I mean giving a behind the scenes or under the hood look at this studio and this experience. So generally, when you find videos on studios from artists or producers, or maybe it's just like a making of the song or something like that, you're getting very static, very well framed and great shots. Often they're really limited in scope and what you can actually see, and you don't really know what's going on or get a real feel of the space that they're in. Usually the shots are great and are often a lot better than the shots that I get, but they leave me with a feeling of curiosity. I want more. Not only do I want to see more, I want to learn from the space. I want to see exactly what's happening and where everything is and how it's all laid out. Which brings us to the walkthrough sequence. The idea here is very simple. If I'm watching a video of a studio tour, I don't want to feel like I'm sitting here watching a video. I want to break down that fourth wall and actually experience being there, just as if I showed up at the front door and walked in myself. If it's done really well, you can bring the viewer into that experience, but adding in the element of things like B-roll, where you get close-ups on equipment. You get to see wide establishing shots of the entire space, as well as literally walking through the room, seeing this room turns into this room. This is how big it really is with people standing in it. Or this is what the room looks like when it's actually in use. Going on the walkthrough is interesting for a ton of reasons. The first, most basic, is just walking through, actually taking the tour. seeing everything, talking about it, hearing about this piece of equipment. Let's say it's a console, came from this place. Here's the story behind it. Here's why I got it. Here's how I'm using it. I can give you a great example. When I went to Butch Walker's ridiculously epic studio, which is in like a barn next to his house. There used to be a horse stable. I mean, there's so many great stories just from Butch's tour, but he has a API console, and the way that he had it set up and the way that he uses it and utilizes it just connected with me immediately, and it really made me want to get one for myself. And even though I'd used consoles for years making records, it just like seeing it in this home environment and how he had it set up for his particular workflow of making albums the way he likes to, it gave me permission. And I think that's another element of the walkthrough that really connects with a lot of people. Obviously, we're all using a lot of the same equipment. So the equipment is interesting sometimes, but generally it's a lot of the same stuff. Regardless if it's this brand or this model, that model, it's generally the same kind of stuff. But seeing how it's used and knowing what that person has made using it just sort of gives us permission. Now, another element of the walkthrough that I always love are the little gems that you pick up along the way that have nothing to do with workflow or, instruments or gear or anything like that. It's usually some sort of storage or the way that something is put away or organized. A lot of us are in our homes, as am I, and I'm in a room that's, it's not the smallest room, but there's a lot of stuff in here. And when you get people in here, it feels small really fast. So optimizing all of your storage, how you have things set up. So again, you can have as little friction as possible, reduce the chances of accidents happening. Those are some of my favorite gems that you can never predict that you're going to see when you go to someone's studio. It's sort of an element of surprise that you get from just sticking around and going through that tour with them. Okay, now the last part of this I think is the most subjective, but I'll just give you an example of how I do things, maybe some things that I don't like that I've done and that I would like to be better. Generally, when you're making a video that someone is going to watch, myself included, there has to be some sort of hook at the beginning to immediately grab your attention, because if it's not interesting right away, if it doesn't grab your attention or your focus, we're just not going to stick around. And this is like almost a subconscious, just existential human problem. But you got to have some sort of way to hook the person, especially if they don't know who the guest is or what the studio is. What I've done for over 100 of these videos is a sequence called the hype sequence, which generally the idea is it's a very exciting sequence that shows a bunch of really like all of the best B-roll shots that I took along with an exciting or interesting piece of music. And I try to edit it all in a way that's just really interesting, timed well with the music, the changes. There's sort of some momentum that builds up and then always ends pretty much, if I can get the shot, on the same shot, which is essentially, this shot where I am right now, where we're all sitting at our work desks, our workstation, studio desk, whatever it is. It gives us a feeling of familiarity, but also seeing, wow, this is laid out in a way that's really interesting to me, or, oh, wow, I have the same setup, or that's something I'd really like to aspire to. Again, the idea of this sequence is just to capture the attention, build some momentum for the viewer so that they can see yes or no. Maybe I do want to stick around and watch the rest of this, or no, not that interesting to me. But it just clear up front gives you an idea of what the video that is coming looks like. After this sequence, I generally like to introduce the video and the guest verbally, which often looks exactly like what you're seeing now. And then after this sequence, we actually enter the walkthrough sequence, which is, again, showing up at that front door and walking through every single room that we can and getting all of the elements of stories, all of the elements of walkthrough gear, all those little gems that we discussed before. Now, one of the things that I think could be better about the majority of studio tours I've done is the lack of musical performance happening in the studio tours. And there's a couple reasons for this. One is it's a timing thing, really. These videos take, anywhere between 3 to 4 hours to shoot, which was when you're asking that time of someone else to go into their studio and give you that time and let them let you put them under a microscope, show every single part of where they work and what they do, then you're asking a lot. So to then ask on top of it, hey, let's do somewhat of a recording session and actually record music performances, that's a whole other element to it that I have been reluctant to do because it's just a big ask. Not to mention, not every single guest actually is a musician themselves or a performer. Sometimes it's just a producer or an engineer who isn't a musician themselves, or there's just not someone around to play anything. So in those situations, it's just impossible to get a musical performance unless I say, hey, why don't you also record me in your studio, which I don't know, maybe some people would be open to. But certainly it wouldn't be that much more interesting to watch. Now, with that being said, I've actually found a way in most circumstances to solve for this, and you'll see in the upcoming studio tours in the new year that there will be a lot more performances sort of sprinkled throughout the studio tour that I think really capture the essence of the space. And I think that is an important element to showing off this place. You're essentially taking a snapshot of this place, of this environment, exactly how it is in that moment, and sharing not only visually and audibly, but like actually getting to hear that space, how it sounds in that time. And I think that is truly epic, not only for the person we're doing the video on, but for me, it's kind of the same thing. I get to go back and remember that trip myself. For you, we'll always be able to come back and watch these experiences, see these snapshots in time, and I just absolutely love that. Now, outside of all of that, the only other part that's missing is a wonderful ad spot for our friends at Sweetwater. You can't do an Epic Studio Tour without mentioning our friends at Sweetwater, because they sponsor all the studio tours and allow me to put all this time and energy into making them as great as I can. So, with that being said, check the links down in the description. I do a very thorough job, I think, of listing all of the equipment that I personally use and love and would recommend to my best friends or family that I use here in my studio. So check that out. Check out the end of year deals on sweetwater.com. Can't thank them enough for sponsoring the channel and supporting these videos. Lastly, thank you for watching these videos, smashing the like button. Let me know what you guys think of the tours down below. This channel is going to continuously have new studio tours as well as clips going up throughout the week. And if you haven't seen what it looks like when they're all done, go ahead and click right here. You can watch one that goes through all three of these sequences exactly how I described.